Welcome back to More Music Por Favor Presents, the stories streaming can't tell. I'm your host, Marcus Reed, and this is the place for more music and the stories behind it. Today we're diving into why every 80s hit song sounds exactly the same. And it's not what you think. Just close your eyes for a second. In the Air Tonight, Phil Collins, 1981. Like a Virgin, Madonna, 1984. Africa, Toto, 1982. Now, what do all three have in common? The exact same drum sound. Not similar, the same. And I don't mean the same style, I mean the same machine. Literally, the same circuit board. The most influential musician of the 1980s wasn't a human being. It was a $3,000 beige box called the LinnDrum LM-2. And here's what nobody tells you about it. To understand why the LinnDrum changed everything, you have to go back to 1979. The music industry had a problem. A drummer problem. Studio sessions were expensive. A single day with a top-tier session drummer could cost thousands of dollars. And drummers, brilliant as they were, made mistakes. They got tired. They wanted overtime. Meanwhile, a guy named Roger Linn, working out of his home in Los Angeles, was tinkering with something different. He wasn't a tech genius. He was a guitarist and songwriter. But he had a wild idea. What if you could record real drum hits, actual snares, actual kicks, and let a machine play them back with perfect timing? The first LM-1 dropped in 1980. It cost around $5,000, which in today's money is well over $15,000. But it didn't matter. Prince bought one immediately. So did Stevie Wonder. Here's the first twist. And this genuinely surprised me when I dug into it. The sounds in the LM-1 were recorded from human drummers. Real hits, real sticks on real drums. Linn hired session players, recorded individual hits at different velocities, and pressed them onto chips. So every time you heard that snare crack, that was a real human hand, frozen in time, played back by a machine. Think about that for a second. The argument that drum machines were fake or inhuman? The sounds were 100% human. It was just the timing that wasn't. By 1982, Linn released the LM-2, the LinnDrum. Better sounds, more memory, lower cost at just under $3,000. And that's when the floodgates opened. Within 2 years, the LinnDrum appeared on records that would collectively sell hundreds of millions of copies. It wasn't that producers were being lazy or unoriginal. It was that this machine sounded incredible. That snare, that particular crack, cut through a mix like nothing else. It had presence, punch, a kind of digital clarity that analog drums in a room couldn't quite replicate. And so, almost without anyone deciding it, the LinnDrum became the sound of a decade. Let's talk about the reach of this machine, because the numbers are almost absurd. When Doves Cry by Prince, 1984. LinnDrum. Jump by Van Halen, 1984. LinnDrum. Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears, 1985. LinnDrum. I Feel For You by Chaka Khan, Don't You Want Me by Human League, Nasty by Janet Jackson. And here's one worth getting precise about. In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. That iconic drum fill, the one that's been in approximately every Thriller movie since 1981, that's actually Phil Collins playing a live acoustic kit. Collins was too good a drummer to let a machine take that moment. But, and here's what most people miss, the rest of the track? The steady mechanical pulse underneath Collins' playing? That's the LinnDrum. Collins was layering the machine's precision against his own human unpredictability. He understood what the machine was for in a way a lot of artists didn't. That tension, human hands on top of machine timing, is part of why that song still sounds like nothing else. Now here's where it gets philosophically interesting. Collins was himself one of the most technically gifted drummers alive. He didn't need a drum machine. He chose it. Because the machine gave him something a live kit couldn't. That eerie mechanical precision that made the song feel like something inevitable, like fate closing in. And that's the deeper story here. The LinnDrum didn't replace artistry. It became an instrument of artistry. But there's another side to this, a human side. When the LinnDrum took over studios, session drummers felt it in their phones. Calls stopped coming. Not all at once, that would almost have been easier. It was gradual. A week between calls became 2. 2 became a month. The studios weren't being cruel, they were being rational. I keep thinking about drummers like Ed Green, who spent the 70s as one of the most in-demand session players in LA, laying down tracks for Barry White, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye. By 1983, his diary was half empty. He described it in interviews as watching a river change course. The water's still moving, just not through your town anymore. And the thing that makes this complicated, genuinely complicated, is that Roger Linn knew. He talked openly about attending a musicians' union meeting in LA, being in a room full of people whose livelihoods his invention had disrupted. He hadn't meant to do that. He'd set out to solve one small personal problem. He was a songwriter who couldn't afford studio time. He solved it. And in doing so, he accidentally rewrote the economics of an entire industry. That's not a villain's story. It's not a hero's story. It's just the way things go. There's also the democratization angle, and this is the part I find genuinely thrilling. Before the LinnDrum, if you wanted professional-sounding percussion, you needed a studio. You needed money. You needed connections. After the LinnDrum, a kid in a bedroom in Detroit with one machine and a synthesizer could make a record that sounded like it came out of a major label facility. Here's the connection that doesn't get made enough. The LinnDrum is a direct ancestor of Detroit techno and Chicago house. When those scenes emerged in the mid-'80s, they were built on drum machines, the LinnDrum, the Roland TR-808, the TR-909, played by young black artists in cities the mainstream industry had written off. The same machine that Phil Collins used in his English estate studio was being reprogrammed in Midwest basements to birth entirely new genres. One machine, two completely different worlds. Both valid, both lasting. So here's the revelation, the thing that reframes everything. We talk about the 80s sound like it was an aesthetic choice, like a generation of producers all woke up one morning and said, you know what? Let's make everything sound like it came from a drum machine. But that's not what happened. What happened was, one engineer solved his own problem. And the solution was so good that it became unavoidable. The 80s didn't choose to sound like the LinnDrum. The LinnDrum became what the 80s sounds like, because every hit record used it, and every hit record shaped what audiences expected. And what audiences expected shaped what producers made. It's a feedback loop, an accidental aesthetic. And the crazy part? It lasted less than a decade in mainstream production. By the late 80s, the LinnDrum was fading, replaced by newer digital workstations and samplers. Roger Linn's own company went bankrupt in 1986. The most influential drum machine in history had a commercial lifespan of roughly 6 years. 6 years. And it defined a decade. That snap you hear on Don't You Want Me, on Jump, on When Doves Cry, that's a specific human drummer's snare hit from a specific recording session, pressed onto a chip, sold to the world, and played back billions of times. Somewhere out there, there's a drummer who doesn't know their hands are on the most heard drum sound in the history of recorded music. The LinnDrum teaches us something important about how culture actually works. We don't always consciously design our eras. Sometimes, one person solves a practical problem, and the solution echoes outward in ways nobody planned. Next time you hear that 80s snare, that snap, you'll know what you're really hearing. You're hearing a moment in 1979 when a guy in Los Angeles wanted to make a demo and couldn't afford a drummer. You're hearing the ghost of a session musician's right hand. You're hearing a $3,000 machine that accidentally became the sound of 10,000 songs. One box, one decade. Infinite echoes. You know, every episode of this podcast exists because of stories exactly like that. A machine, a moment, a sound that outlasted everyone's expectations. And that same spirit is exactly what we look for every Friday when we drop new music. Speaking of which, in case you missed last week's Por Favor Fridays, we released some tracks on February 20th that deserve your ears. Pop Pulse Wave dropped 2 AM Pulse, emotional dance pop with UK garage energy about the moment you choose yourself over the thing that's been holding you back. The production has that same pulsing mechanical momentum that made the LinnDrum irresistible. Forward motion you can feel in your chest. Heartland Harmony Hub released Staying When You Wanna Leave, a gorgeous Americana ballad about the quiet heroism of commitment. Raw, human, nothing between you and the story. Which, honestly, after an episode about machines and technology, hits different. And Sad Indie Echoes gave us Your Ruin Sounds Like Mine, bedroom pop about finding someone whose damage mirrors yours and wondering if that's love or just excellent taste and dysfunction. The kind of track that feels like it was made for exactly 2 a.m. All of these are on our Por Favor Fridays New Pop and Storytelling Songs playlist. Or find everything at moremusicporfavor.com/artists-albums. That's the story behind the LinnDrum, the $3,000 box that accidentally built the sound of a decade. If you loved this, hit subscribe to More Music Por Favor for fresh tracks every Friday, and new episodes of More Music Por Favor Presents every week. Drop a comment. What's your favorite 80s song? And now that you know, can you hear the LinnDrum in it? Next week, we're telling the story of a voice you've heard on some of the biggest records ever made. A voice that gave chills to millions. A voice whose name almost nobody knows. The backup singer who outshone the star. And what that story reveals about who really gets credit in the music industry. Gracias y hasta la próxima set.